Okay, good morning, everyone. We are on the last words of 91b3. Tzadi Aleph Amud Beis. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina said to Ravashi, and now we're on Tzadi Beis. Okay. 92a. Miyam Rav Yochanan Hachi. Did Rav Yochanan really say this? Meaning, remember, we had this machlokas between Rav and Shmuel and Rav Yochanan about Rav Shimon's halacha. That's a lot of names. Okay, so let's review. Rav Shimon was the one who said, I'm allowed to carry from courtyard to karpef to rooftop and back and forth. All those things are totally fine, right? That was the view of Rav Shimon. But there was machlokas as to what extent did he say this. According to Rav, he only said this when the individual chatzeros that were carrying from did not make an eruv, right? They did not make an eruv, because had they made an eruv, then there's a concern that a person may take something from his house, bring it into the courtyard, and then that object is going to be carried from place to place, which everyone would agree is not allowed, right? Rav Yochanan and Shmuel were of the opinion that even if an object is found, even if the courtyard made an eruv of their own, we're not concerned that someone's going to make the mistake of taking something from a home, then from the courtyard into the next courtyard. We're not afraid of that, right? So that was the machlokas between Rav on the one hand saying it's specifically when no eruv was made, and Shmuel and Rav Yochanan said even when an eruv was made. Okay? Yeah? If you don't, just tell me if you didn't catch that. Good? Yes, thank you for asking. Okay, so again, let's review. We have, let's just keep it simple, 2 courtyards, okay? 2 courtyards, okay? And there's houses. Everyone agrees that Rav Yochanan allows, that Rav Shimon, the Tana, allows carrying from here to here. Okay, and back and forth. No problem. Even though they didn't make an eruv. Everyone would agree. The question is, when? Okay, so Rav says the only time you're allowed to do this, carry back and forth according to Rav Shimon, is if there was no eruv made. No eruv made in each of them, okay? Why? Because then the only objects you're going to be carrying are objects that started Shabbos outside of a home. Because Rav Shimon, who allows this carrying, only allows carrying from one courtyard to another courtyard. He does not allow carrying an object that started in the house and then out, that he would not allow, because that's too much of a shift of a domain, right? So Rav Shimon does not allow carrying an object that started in the house, and therefore, based on that, Rav's interpretation of Rav Shimon, again, Rav's an Amora, next set of generations, right? He says the only time you're allowed to carry from courtyard to courtyard is if no eruv was made. If an eruv was made, there's a concern that a person may take something from his house, right? Okay, and then go ahead and bring it to the next place, which would be Asr according to Rav Shimon. So therefore, Rav says only when no eruv was made. Rav Yochanan and Shmuel said even if an eruv was made in each place or in one place, doesn't matter. Even if an eruv was made, it's fine. We're not afraid the person's going to make this mistake. A person will realize this object they can't bring, this object they could bring. And therefore, Rav Yochanan / Shmuel holds that even if there is an eruv in one or both of them, Rav Shimon would still allow bringing objects back and forth, and an object that started off in a home, a person would be careful about and not bring it from one place to another. Make sense? Okay, fine, good. Says the Gemara, but now the Gemara is going to question this. Rav Yochanan paskind, Rav Yochanan was of the second opinion, saying that even if an eruv was made, then Rav Shimon would allow this. Okay, the problem is, V'hamar Rav Yochanan, didn't Rav Yochanan, don't we know Rav Yochanan taught that halacha kistam mishnah, that whenever there is an anonymous mishnah, whenever a mishnah is simply phrased without any attribution, thank you. Without any attribution, then we rule like that Mishnah. In other words, Rav Yochanan's of the opinion that Rav Yehuda Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah, is whenever he whenever he wrote a Mishnah, so whenever he wrote a Mishnah, without writing a specific name, it was Rav Yehuda Hanasi's way of conveying, this is the halacha. This is the halacha, okay? So, and we're going to read a Stam Mishnah, which seems to negate this halacha. It's not, it was taught in a Mishnah. Kosel shebein shtei chatzeros. If there's a wall between 2 courtyards, Gevor asara v'rochav arba. Okay, it's 10 tvachim high and 4 tvachim wide. Right? So we've had this case before. Now we're going to look at this from a not bird's eye view, the other view, right? So basically you have courtyard over here, okay? Courtyard over here and something over, and this in the middle, and there's going to be fruit on the top of this, okay? Those are our fruits. Courtyard number 1, courtyard number 2. This marker is... Does someone magically replace these, or are they just... Okay, fine. They just somehow magically... Look at this. Okay, I don't know. Okay.
Long time from side to side.
I'm doing it wrong.
No, I'm just saying that's how it comes out in that one end.
Smart. Cool. Okay, fine. Court number one, court number two. There is a wall in between and there's fruit on top. Okay, so let's see the case. So, says the Mishnah. Kosel shebein shtei chadros. There's a wall between two courtyards. Gvoa sar barachav abad that's at least 10 tvachim high and 4 tvachim wide. Okay. Ma'arvin shtayim ve'ma'arvin achan. The two courtyards are allowed to, they are not allowed to make a single common eruv. Why? Because there's a full-fledged wall in between them. They're two totally separate domains. Fine. Elu olam mikan ve'ochlin. These residents of one courtyard are allowed to go up and eat from the fruit over there. Ve'elu olam mikan ve'ochlin. And the others are allowed to go up on their side and eat. Uvilvad shlo yiridu lamata. But they are not allowed to take the fruit down below. Now let's think about what this case is. This case is a case where this is according to Rav Shimon, who allows going from one courtyard to another. Why would you not be allowed to take from this is basically a case where they each have their own eruv, right? And there's overlapping space over here. And the Mishnah is saying, I'm not allowed to take fruit from there and bring it down to other place, right? So according to Rav's interpretation, this actually makes a lot of sense. Right, because this is specifically going to be right. But according to Rav Yochanan's interpretation, who says that even in a situation where they had their own eruv, you're not allowed to bring it down. Why according to Rav Yochanan, who said that even if they made an eruv, right, even when they made eruv, you would be allowed to bring it around. Why are you not allowed to bring it down in this case? Right. In other words, according to Rav, there's going to be cases where you are not allowed to, Rav said, if they each made their own eruv, then you're not allowed to be carrying between two courtyards, okay? But according to Rav Yochanan, he said, whether they made an eruv or did not make an eruv, you're always allowed to be carrying between two courtyards. So why in this case can you carry between the two courtyards? Meaning this is essentially shared space. The reason, right, this is basically space which belongs to both two and belongs to one, right? Because it's in the middle of both of them. So according to Rav Yochanan's interpretation of Rav Shimon, why can't this fruit be brought down to other places? Right, this is right. So that's the challenge. The Gemara says no. My lamata. What does it mean when the Mishnah said that you cannot bring it down below? Lamata levatim. It means you can't bring it into the home. In other words, he wasn't saying Rav Yochanan would argue that that this Mishnah is saying you are each, number one is allowed to take some fruit and bring it down. Number two is allowed to bring fruit and bring it down. Right, which is consistent with Rav Shimon's view. What the Mishnah was saying that you can't bring it down was saying what you can't do is bring it into your home. That is not allowed. Right? That is not allowed, and that's what it meant bringing it down. Bring it down. If you want to bring it down, just bring it into the courtyard. Yeah, because Rav Shimon holds you're allowed to go from courtyard to courtyard, and therefore this is consistent with Rav Shimon's view. What this Mishnah is telling us is you can't bring the fruits into a home, which is also Rav Shimon's view.
So we said before we brought this up in the bottom picture that the concern is that you may bring it from your house out and bring it around according to Rav's interpretation. Right?
Yes.
In this case, we're reversing it and saying this is the same concern with bringing it from the house out would be you can't bring it in, right?
The
same issue exists with transferring domains.
Again, but we're no longer in Rav. We're in
right. But this is.
Everyone would agree, meaning everyone agrees you are not allowed to bring things, in Rav Shimon's world, you're not allowed to bring things from courtyards into homes or homes into courtyards. That's not allowed. Everyone would agree. The question is, do you make a decree, right?
Because all we said before was bringing it from the home out.
But it's the same issue. Out, in.
So it goes both ways.
Correct. But again, I just want to clarify. Everyone agrees, Rav Shimon saying you're not allowed to bring it from courtyards into homes, homes into courtyards. The question is, do you make a decree? Rav says you make a decree if they made an eruv. Rav Yochanan and Rav Shimon say Rav Yochanan and Shmuel say you don't make a decree. But now this Mishnah is telling us you are allowed to bring it into the courtyards, which is exactly what Rav Shimon holds. But what you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to bring it into a home, which, again, would be consistent with Rav Shimon's view. Now, the Gemara asks, wait a second, Rav Chia taught a brisa. Now, remember, we've spoken about this before. Brisas are oftentimes taught in a way that elaborates on a Mishnah. Sometimes we have a Mishnah which is a little bit ambiguous, and then you'll have a brisa which kind of elaborates, gives a little bit more detail. So the Gemara tried answering, or did answer, that when the Mishnah said that you're not allowed to bring it down below, it doesn't mean down below into the courtyard, because that is totally fine, is what Rabbi Yochanan is arguing, but it means you're not allowed to bring it to the home. However, Rav Chia taught a brisa, uvavachli is zeh omed bimkoma v'ochel, v'zeh omed bimkoma v'ochel. Okay, that what the brisa meant when it says you can't bring it down, what the Mishnah meant when you can't bring it down, it meant that as long as this one doesn't stand in his courtyard and eat, meaning bring it down from the wall into his courtyard, and this one doesn't stand in his courtyard and eat. So what do you see? What does the word lamata mean according to the Brisa's interpretation of the Mishnah? It doesn't mean into the home, it just means from the wall into your own courtyard.
I can't would just use the same thing he was saying, that when it comes to taking it off the wall, it's different because of the possibility for which is robbing. You think you can just put it on down.
You're saying Rav Meir's concern, because Rav Shimon never had Rav Meir's concern. Right? Fine. Okay. But good question. Yeah. Amrle, ask the Gemara, V'chi Rebbe lo shnav. The Gemara says no. Rav Ashi pushes back. He says, Rebbe, who codified the Mishnah, did not use this terminology. Rebbe Chia minayin lo. So where did Rav Chia, who is a student of Rebbe, learn it from? In other words, the Gemara is saying, I'm going to reject this brisa. So again, we asked a question from a Mishnah, and we answer the Mishnah saying the word lamata doesn't mean down into the courtyard. Lamata means into a home. The Gemara says, wait, but there's a brisa which says clearly that lamata does not mean into a home. It means into the courtyard. The Gemara says, but it's a brisa. And who taught this brisa? Rav Chia, who is a student of Rebbe, who is the author of the Mishnah. So Rav Chia, where did Rav Chia learn this? It wasn't a very authoritative brisa because he clearly didn't learn it from his Rebbe. Had his Rebbe known this brisa, he would have incorporated that language into the Mishnah. The fact that he didn't is basically telling us this brisa is not very authoritative, and therefore we have no problem rejecting the brisa. In other words, whenever we have a question, if it's a question from a Mishnah is the most authoritative thing possible. But the fact that it's a question from a brisa, sometimes the brisa will accept, sometimes will reject. Over here, the person teaching and this brisa, which is a question, is a student of the author of the Mishnayos. The fact that the author of the Mishnayos rejected this brisa, or at least was not aware of this brisa, clearly that means that it was not something which was authoritative, and therefore the Gemara says there is no question from there.
Why did they put that in?
What?
Why did they put that in?
Well, they put it as a question and then ultimately rejected it.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Okay. Let's go a little further because we got to cover a little ground because Max is teaching tomorrow and I want to make sure he doesn't have so much to catch up. Okay. So it's more. Okay. Let's say you have two courtyards with a ruin between them. Look at the picture. You see the picture on the bottom. I don't have to draw the picture. Okay. Achas erva, the achas lo erva. One of them made an eruv, meaning one courtyard made an eruv with its residence. One courtyard did not make an eruv with its residence. Okay. So now we're back in the world of Rav. Remember, what did Rav say? Rav said that in a situation where they both made their own eruvs, right? And Rav said like this: you have two courtyards. This courtyard case. Rav said if you both made eruvs, then you're not allowed. Then Rav Shimon would say you're not allowed to carry between them. But this case has one of them making an eruv, one of them not making an eruv, and there is a chorva, a ruins in between them. Yeah. Everything on the case? Yeah? So says the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna, we're going to see two opinions about what Rav would say. Amar Rav Huna, Nostin osa lezo shelo erva, avla she'erva lo. So Rav Huna says we give dominion over to the ruin to the one that did not join an eruv, right? The one that did not join in an eruv, but we did not allow the chatzah that did join an eruv use the ruin. Okay, I know this always sounds a little counterintuitive, but think about again why. What's the whole concern? The concern is I'm taking something from my house, bringing it into the courtyard, and then bringing it into another domain, which I cannot do. And therefore, Rav Huna says that Rav would say the one that made an eruv can't carry at all into the ruin. Why? Because they might take something out of their home, bring it into the courtyard, and then bring it into the ruins, which is not allowed. However, the one who went ahead and did not make an eruv, they didn't do anything, they are allowed to carry from their courtyard into the ruins because the objects that they're going to carry into the ruins are from where? They're from their courtyard and not from the home. Okay? Why? And the Gemara just spells down 92a2. Dilma asla puke mane. Because there's a concern that the people who made an eruv are going to carry from their home into the courtyard and then from the courtyard into the ruins. Says the Gemara, but the Gemara has another opinion. Chia bar Rav, Chia, the son of Rav, has a different version. Amar aflisha erva. He quotes his father, Rav, saying, even the chatzar that joined the eruv. Now, those words are a little ambiguous. What do you mean, even the courtyard that joined the eruv? Ushtein asurus, meaning that both of them cannot use the ruin. Both of them cannot use the ruin. That's what Rav taught. Okay? Vim tomar shteim mutaros, and maybe you'll say, no, maybe they're both allowed to. Maybe they're both allowed to use the ruin. So he says that can't be. Okay, because that can't be because when Rav taught us the original case, remember, Rav taught us this case over here and said that you cannot carry between them unless they both did not make an eruv. But that implies that if one of them made an eruv, you still would not be allowed to carry. It's only when both of them did not make an eruv. The question is, if one of them made an eruv and one of them did not make an eruv, then you should allow the person who did not make an eruv to carry, and yet Rav did not do so. Right? In other words, again, we had a case. Ignore all the lines over here, right? We had this case, okay, that this case over here, where Rav says that in this case, they are both not allowed to carry. They're both not, when the two courtyards are side by side, you cannot carry between them unless you have this case. But let's say you have this case, one made an eruv and one did not make an eruv. What does Rav say? you still can't carry. You could only carry did not make an Erev. Ask so Rav Chia, the son of Rav Chia Rav is saying, wait a second, why? But in this case, where one did not make an Erev, one made an Erev, he should permit these people to carry, but he does not. He says only when they both did not make an Erev are you allowed to carry. But when one did not make an Erev and one did make an Erev, you're still not allowed to carry. What does that teach you? That teaches us that we're still concerned if this guy did not make an Erev and this guy did make an Erev, there's still going to be confusion. Because this person might bring things out, then this guy might bring things out of his house, and this person may go ahead and take those things and bring them back over here, and therefore there's still going to be issues. And therefore he says, no, only in this case when they both don't make an Erev. And therefore similarly over here, in the case of in the case of two courtyards with ruins in between, it's only in a situation that both, and even if one of them made an Erev, one of them does not make an Erev, they can't carry until both don't make an Erev. Right? Fine. Says the Gemara. Wait, the Gemara says no, there's no proof from there, because Hassam, in the case of the two courtyards, Kevan Dimitri Mani Debatim B'Chatzos Lepuke. In the case of two courtyards, people take items out of their home and put in the courtyard because courtyards are well protected. And therefore, Rav said, in the case of two courtyards, unless they both did not make an Erev, there's a concern that people are going to take things out of their homes, bring it into their courtyards, and then they're going to get confused and start bringing them in different directions. But over here, in the case of a ruin, people do not typically bring things and put things in a ruin, because a ruin is a really bad place to store things. It's not fully protected. You don't have a proper wall, and therefore the Gemara says, don't bring me a proof from this case. Maybe in the case of a churba, Rav would allow the people to carry, because in a case of a churba where there's less of a concern that people are going to take objects. What's the whole issue? The issue is maybe someone's going to take something from their courtyard and bring it into the next place. In a case of a ruin, are we really concerned? Says the Gemara. The Gemara pushes back. The Gemara says, maybe don't bring me a proof from this case, because this case, people are really going to be bringing objects from their home and putting it in the courtyard. But in the case of a ruin, people are not going to be bringing things from the ruin, from their courtyard into the ruin, because it's not well protected. Okay? The Gemara has another version. Ika da Amri, V'chia barav Amar af l'she'erva. He has a different version which says, even to the chatzar that joins in the Erev, ushtei mutaros. And Rav, what Rav said was that both courtyards are permitted. Okay? Vim tomar shtei masuros. And if you want to say that they're both forbidden, and if you want to say they're both forbidden because of this case where Rav clearly says they both have to not make an Erev, so Gemara says no, and now we know no, when the house utensils, since they're safe in a courtyard, there Rav said unless both of them did not make an Erev, it's forbidden because a person may take something from their home and put it into the courtyard. Aval chorba lo mintri, but in a case of a ruin, people don't typically take things out of their home and put them in a ruin, and therefore there is no comparison between these cases. And although in this case Rav says they both have to not make an Erev in order to be permitted, in a case of a ruin, even if only one of them did not make an Erev, it's going to be allowed. Okay? Let's go a little further. Start a new Mishnah. Gag. No new discussion, which is actually Review's discussion, but we're moving away from that whole discussion of Rav and Shmuel and Rav Shimon. So if that was all too much, new topic, a new chance. It was a little complicated. Okay, let's go. Says the Mishnah, we saw this before. Gag, gadol, samach lekatan. Let's see look at the picture. A small roof next to a big roof. Okay, hagadol mutter. The people in the large roof are allowed to carry. Vakatan aser. The people in the small courtyard are not allowed to carry. Why is that? Very simple. Because... Why? Because we've quoted this Mishnah before. Very good, right? So basically you have big roof, small roof. So the people in the small roof and the people in the big roof have wall number 1, wall number 2, wall number 3, and this is the doorway, right? This is wall number 4, right? You see that? They have 4 walls. This is the doorway. This is less than 10 amos. And this is a doorway. This is a wall with a doorway. No problem. The people in the inner wall, the small wall, have 1 wall, 2 walls, 3 walls, but this is wide open. And therefore there's no 4th wall. And therefore the people in this place are allowed to carry. People in this place cannot carry. Make sense? Okay? Says the Gemara further. Says the Mishnah further. Chatzar gadol shnifer tana. Similarly, you have a large courtyard. Look at the second picture. You have a large courtyard which was breached into a small one. Gedol muteris. The large one is allowed again because you have 4 walls, right? 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th wall has side posts, and that's the beginning of your wall. Okay, and but carrying between the small courtyard and its houses is prohibited because the small courtyard does not have a 4th wall. Right? Pretty straightforward. Yeah? Everyone with me? Good. Says the Gemara, let me limit tarti. What do you need these two cases? In other words, they're basically saying the same thing. Whether it's a rooftop or a courtyard, they're basically saying the same thing. Le Rav, the Gemara says, according to Rav, the reason that it says both cases is actually to show me that there is a comparison between rooftops and courtyards. Meaning, Ketani Gag Dumi Dechatzer. It's to show that it's to show that the rooftops case is similar to the case of the courtyard. Meaning, Ma Chatzer Minkara Mechitza. Okay, which Rav are we talking about over here? We're talking about Rav's halacha. Remember, we had a discussion about a fourth wall, right? We have this notion, when you have a rooftop, there's a halacha that the walls are seen as virtually going up, right? But we had a machlokas, Rav and Shmuel, in the following case. Why do I keep on bumping into it? Okay, this case, if let's say they're flush to one another. Rav said, I see wall 1, I see wall 2, I see wall 3. I don't see this wall, and therefore there's no wall over here. Shmuel said, no, there is a wall over here. There is a wall over here. Just because I can't see it, at the end of the day, I know there's two buildings that are flush together. This counts as a fourth wall, right? So Rav says that I need to, the only case I see 4 walls is when it's freestanding. Then I see 1, 2, 3, 4. But in this case, when it's flush against something else, there is no fourth wall. And Shmuel says, as long as there's not a lot of traffic between them, this fourth wall is a good wall, and this thing is surrounded, right? So we had the machlokas earlier. So now the Gemara says the reason this Mishnah is going to be taught in a way to surface some of these halachos. So Rav says the reason it has these two cases is to tell you that the roof has to be similar to the courtyard. Just like in the courtyard, the walls are quite evident. Avgag minkra mechitzta, so too with the roof walls, they have to be visible, as opposed to this case, Rav would say, this is not a good case. This is not a case where the walls are visible, and therefore so Rav's saying this Mishnah is a proof to me that the walls are not visible, that only when the walls are visible, and this case where the two walls are side by side, two roofs are side by side, it would not be a good wall. Ula Shmuel, he says the opposite. Gag dumi dechatzer, that the roof, not opposite, he says the roof is similar to the courtyard in what sense? Ma chatzer de kadars luhu rabim, just like the courtyard is a place which many people tread, many people walk from one to another, and that's why the fourth wall of the inner courtyard does not work. Afgag nami kadars luhu rabim, so too the case of a roof which will not work is when many people tread from one to another. Many people are walking from one to another. Meaning Rav would agree, Shmuel agrees, if there's a lot of traffic between these people, that's traffic, then this fourth wall is not a wall. But if there is, and that's similar to a courtyard. Courtyards, people walk around a lot, right? Everyone walks around in courtyards. But if it's a rooftop where people do not walk around, meaning not similar to a courtyard, then this Mishnah would have said that no, there's a fourth wall for the people in the middle, because even though they're flush, Shmuel holds that even though things are flush, we still see it as a wall. So why did the Mishnah say the two cases? According to Shmuel, the reason it said two cases is to show you that it's specifically in this case when it's similar to a courtyard, meaning that there's a lot of people walking between the two. That's when the small rooftop is not surrounded. But if it's a case where there's not a lot of traffic, meaning it's not like a courtyard, then this fourth wall would be a good wall. Make sense? Okay, one last quick halacha. Yasef Rabba Rav Zera of Rabba Rav Chanan v'Yasef Abayu Gabayu v'Yasef Kamri, and they said Shema Minam Masisim. We learn from Mishnah to Yori Gedola B'Ktana that the residents of the large courtyard kind of extend into the small courtyard. Means Yori Ketana B'Gdola, but the residents of the small courtyard do not extend into the large chutzner. What does that mean? Ketzad Yefanim Gedola. Let's say you have grapevines which are growing. Right, there's a halacha called there's a halacha called kilayim, which you're not allowed to grow vines together with other produce. Okay, asur d'oraisa. You can't grow vines. That's a form of planting shatnez type of thing, right, so to speak. So basically, let's say you have vines growing over here in the big one. Okay, these are vines, and you have small plants. Grow a different type of plants growing over here, right? So the Gemara says like this. So asur l'zroa b'esaktana. You can't. So if you have vines growing in the big one, you can't plant in the small one. Okay, because there is, from the perspective of the big one, this is kind of extending into the small one. Okay, vimzar, if you planted them zran asurin, they are forbidden. 92b1. Yifan mutarim, but the grapevines in the large courtyard, if you planted things side by side, the ones in the big courtyard are permitted. Why? Because from the perspective of the big courtyard, there's a wall. There's a wall, even though it's a virtual wall, but there's a wall, and therefore these grapes are permitted, and these things are asur, right? Gefana b'ktana, the grapevines growing in the small one, mutal izroas gedola, then you'd be allowed to plant in the big one, because at the end of the day, there's a wall over here. So basically, this wall is not just a wall for caring for Shabbos, it's also going to be a wall for kilayim, that basically we're going to see this as a full-fledged wall, and the people over here are allowed to, it's seen as totally closed off, and these things would be permitted, these things would be asur. Good luck, Max. Have a great day.